Well, this weekend will mark the 5th anniversary of Stephen Harper's first election victory. How have those 5 years changed Canada, and how have they changed the man himself? Late last week, the Prime Minister sat down to try to answer those questions and more. Tonight, part 1 of our interview. Prime Minister, I guess I should start with a congratulations. A couple of days, 5 years since you first won office. But it's actually, more than that, in the sense that it's 5 years, almost to the day,
right,
that you will have been leading minority government in Canada. No other Prime Minister has gone that long. I think you now edge out Lester Pearson. Does that mean something to you?
I think it's I think it's just an interesting statistic. The minority parliament's been interesting. I think we've demonstrated that it can work. It hasn't always been pretty. We don't get done everything we want to get done, or sometimes I think we need to get done. But I think for the most part, considering what could have happened, it served Canadians fairly well.
A couple of years ago you told me that you thought that Canada may be in for a period of minority government, a series of minority governments. Do you still feel that way?
It's possible, although you're probably aware of my take on where we're headed in the next Parliament. I think we saw a forewarning of that in this Parliament. I think the next time our party will either form a majority, or I think we'll see a coalition of the other parties. That's my belief. Everything I see points to that. I, of course, would always be happy to, if people of Canada elect a Conservative minority, I'd be happy to do that. But my anticipation is that we'll go one way or the other next time.
Whenever you talk that way about the other parties forming a coalition, you tend to do it in a pretty negative way, and almost that it's somehow it's kind of undemocratic to have a coalition. I mean, there are coalitions in Western democracies, including your friend David Cameron.
Of course, but I think and David Cameron is an interesting example, because they had that debate there, and what I think public concluded was undemocratic and not really legitimate was a coalition of parties who lost an election. Mr. Cameron won the election and then was able to form a coalition. I think really that's the issue. I think if coalition is part of what the public was prepared to vote for, but I think when it's a coalition that is seeming to overturn the result of the election, I think that's when the public have a big problem with that.
I want to talk a little bit about the 5 years, because I think it's interesting to try and sense how the country's changed, how you've changed in those 5 years, and especially in terms of your thinking towards government itself. I think it's common for most people to assume they'd feel a certain way if they had such and such a job, and then perhaps feel a little differently when they're in it. So I've been doing a little reading.
Okay.
And I found a few of the things that you've said over the past few years. In a couple of years before you were elected as Prime Minister, you wrote an op-ed piece when you were asked, what do you think of the federal government? What needs to change? And you were pretty critical of the federal government, not just from a partisan way, but from a structural way, that things had to change. You felt that Ottawa was elitist and too centrist in its structure. But you also had this line: the federal government doesn't do anything particularly well except collect money from political opponents and shower it on political supporters. Well, it's pretty tough talk, but I mean, that's one thing when you're outside. You've been running that same federal government for 5 years. Do you still look at it that way?
Well, I think we've changed a lot of things, Peter, and I won't say that one sees things differently as Prime Minister or leader of the opposition private citizen. I'm not going to deny that, but I think we've changed some things. I mean, one of the first things we brought in was the Federal Accountability Act, a series of measures. We changed the whole structure of donations and financing of political parties. We brought in new rules on lobbying, and I'm not going to say that we run a perfect government by any means, but there have been no corruption scandals or anything resembling that under this government. You look at Canada.
Does nothing? No, but does nothing particularly well.
Look at Canada's economic action plan. We had a series of things under the previous government. You remember HRSD, sponsorship scandals. It seemed like a series of boondoggles, either corruption or incompetency scandals. And once again, not claiming we're perfect, but look at the economic action plan. I mean, we got the federal bureaucracy, the senior public servants, who deserve a lot of credit for the success in rolling that out. We got them finding ways to reduce approval processes, to work constructively with provinces and municipalities on identifying priorities and to get projects up and running and rolled out in record time. So I do think we've changed some of the things. You know, obviously that's a leader of the opposition speaking, but I do think the performance of the federal government as an institution has been significantly better in the last few years than it was before.
The day you won office as leader
Yeah.
of the Conservative Party,
Okay, the new party.
speech you made at the new party, the speech you made at that convention in 2004, you said, we can create a country built on solid conservative values,
not on expensive liberal promises. A country the Liberals wouldn't even recognize, the kind of country I want to lead.
Is that what you think you've created so far?
Well, I think, you know, I think the country's moving in the right direction. Look, Peter, you know, here's the big picture. 5 years ago, at best, we were in the middle of the pack in advanced countries. Today, if you look at most performance indicators, we're at the top, and in a challenging economic time. Now, you know, obviously, the challenging economic time is the big reality. But I think in many ways it's like business. You know, everybody makes money when times are good. It's when times are not so good that the groundwork is laid for the next generation. I think we're doing that. I think notwithstanding all the challenges that continue to be with us, I think we've done most of the right things on the economy. We're coming out of this recession. We have to keep working with our global partners, but we're coming out in pretty good shape. And I think we've got a generation of tremendous opportunity moving forward for this country.
You know, there are those who criticize you as sort of a one-man band, that you run everything, and that your ministers are often kind of yes people to you.
You know, in terms of that particular criticism, Peter, I mean, you've been around long enough. You know, every prime minister who's been in charge, whether it's all across the spectrum, Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Mulroney, Mr. Chrétien, every prime minister is accused of being a one-man band, because the reality, the prime minister is the chief executive officer of our government. The prime minister does not sit in his office and just do things off the top of his head. It's part of leading a team and figuring out what the consensus is of that team in almost every case. There are, of course, exceptions where the prime minister will say, we've got to go this way, regardless of maybe some other views. But those are pretty rare.
I'm not an economist,
Yeah.
you are, but you know, I'm puzzled, and so it appears are some economists, as to how you can attack the deficit issue and the debt, overall debt issue, by decreasing corporate taxes, by not increasing personal taxes, and at least so far, not attacking that size of government issue. Like,
well, I was going to say, Peter, you were doing so well until now, because you were here. I had CBC attacking me from the right.
I'm not attacking you. I'm just laying out the argument that comes from some of your supporters.
Not very many, but let me respond to that one. I think it is transparent as an economist that you're not going to grow our economy by raising taxes. You know, look at ourselves, compare the United States and others, look at the job growth. Do you think that would continue if we started raising taxes on consumers and raising taxes on employers? Several years ago, Minister Flaherty, in concert with most of the other provinces, by the way, not just Conservative governments, Liberal governments, NDP governments, we set out to brand this country as having a 25% business tax rate, shared federal-provincial. And that's what we've all, not all of us, but almost all of the senior levels of government, senior governments in this country, have been aiming for and moving towards. And why do we want that? Because it will put us in a good competitive position that will attract investment, but at the same time, over time, that will maximize revenue to the government. Raising our taxes will, you know, we can get some more revenue this year, but frankly, it's going to make this a less competitive country, a less good place to invest. So, you know, we're aiming for a 25% rate. As we've cut these taxes a lot already, have we seen huge drops in revenue other than through the recession? No. In fact, revenues have been very robust because we're attracting investment.
So you think there's less kind of partisan rhetoric?
Well, there's always partisan rhetoric.
Well, the kind of over the line stuff.
Yeah,
that, you know, we've seen from both sides.
I thought particularly the last few months was, you know, pretty. I thought Parliament was actually in the fall pretty productive, pretty well behaved for the most part. Do I like everything that's said to me in question period each day? No, but that's part of being Prime Minister.
Well, hockey can be like politics, and it's not over till it's over.
That's right.
Do we have an election this year, do you think? What is your gut?
My gut tells me I don't know. It's 50-50. We take the threats from the opposition very seriously. I don't think it's in the country's interest. I don't think it makes any sense to have one right now. But if we're forced into one, we'll be ready.
Prime Minister, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Peter.
Now, you heard the Prime Minister suggest he thinks the tone among the parties has improved of late. Not long after he made that remark, his party launched a new series of attack ads on the opposition, again targeting Michael Ignatieff's personal history away from Canada. This weekend marks the 5th anniversary of the Conservatives' 2006 election victory. Some of the key elements of Stephen Harper's interview these past 2 nights will be included in this weekend's one-on-one right there at the Times on your screen.